Hey everybody. Before we start this week, and we've got a lot to talk about this week, let's talk about last week. As far as the material went, it gives you a little bit of an idea of CRJU 340. One thing I didn't talk too much about was the idea of statutory construction, and something that you're going to talk a lot about in 340, and that's that idea that the plain language of the statute is how a statute will be interpreted. And then if there's confusion about that language, then it may go deeper into what's known as legislative intent. Interesting Supreme Court case this past week just about that concept. And the court, in a unanimous decision, talked about the plain language of the statute. So a statute can be confusing, can be poorly drafted. You have fewer lawyers that are in Congress and the legislature, and so many times just bad language, poorly put together. Statutes cause confusion, and then have to be amended or altered or outright rejected by the courts, and then reconsidered by the legislature. And that happens. That happens frequently. So, some things to take away are the elements of a crime. I mean, what you have to have a crime, and that's that idea of the required mental state, mens rea, actus reus, and please avoid the idea of a guilty act. It's not a guilty act. It's an act that causes social harm. Mens rea, required mental state, that the actus reus, and then those two have to concur. They have to have some semblance of a time when they intersect for there to be a crime. And then you have the remaining components of the crime, the idea of the social harm, and it must be present, and social harm has to be caused by something, causation. So make sure you at least, I think you'd be a little bit ahead of the game if you have an idea about that early in your career in 340. So that's what 340 is going to be about. Now we go to this week. Oh my goodness. I really struggled as to what to talk about this week here. I mean, there's a ton of really important information when it comes to understanding a police department. I think the first thing we should talk about is the idea that police departments strive to be professional, and they seek that professionalism. And it got to the point where you saw many chief executives, meaning chiefs of police police departments, that would wear plain clothes exclusively. Other members of the department that had the option of a uniform, usually administrative people, would wear plain clothes, suits and that. Detectives would, it was interesting because there was a time when a detective was required to be in a coat and tie. Even if they were called in at, dark 30 to investigate a crime, it was still required that they showed up in a shirt and tie. And that's changed quite a bit, and now you see them in polo shirts, you see them in BDUs, battle dress utilities, although that's going to be part of the rest of the discussion for the week. So interesting concepts there. Now, as we look at that professional organization, now you see more and more chiefs will be in uniform. And this is for the image that the police department is trying to present to the public. And a uniform, whether you like it or not, a uniform looks very professional, and it is it's one way to immediately identify whether or not you're dealing with the police or fire department or the CEO of an electronics firm. And say more and more chiefs will be not exclusively, but be frequently seen in a uniform. Now, as we move through the week, I think the next thing when we look at management level people and the management of a police department is a concept called mission, vision, values. In 2000 moving forward, maybe late 1990s moving forward, mission, vision, values became very important for agencies. And they would spend a tremendous amount of effort developing their mission statements. And a mission is where a police department wants to be, what does it seek to achieve, that police department. The vision statement may be how it's going to get there, and then values are those core beliefs in any police department that you read. I think if you were to take the time and open up 20 different police departments on the internet and go to their homepage, go to their values, they're going to have some level of integrity, honesty, transparency, one of those buzzwords. That's going to be without saying. You're going to see that there. Service to the public. Service has become much more than of a goal of policing. Since the push towards community policing, the late 1990s, and beyond. I realized that you studied last week that it was 1980s that you saw the push towards community policing, but that took quite a while to really get a grip, get hold of, and get traction, I guess is a good word for it. So, as it got later, then you saw those things, and then mission, vision, values popped up. But here's a hard part, though, with a mission statement. And my big criticism of police management in this realm is that it usually is a poster that's on the back door of the police station by the police cars. So when officers, walk out or come in from the field at the end of the day, or when they come into the station to do, whatever work they might have been called to do, they end up looking at this sign. With the mission statement on it. And that's about the extent of it. Agencies, when they first develop a mission statement, it becomes a really big deal, and they really push it, and they try to train on it, and they mention it. And if you're in a promotional exam, or even a hiring, process, there's going to be some expectation that you're at least aware of the mission statement. So just a hint to y'all that are going into police work, before you show up for your interview, make sure that you spend some good time with that mission statement. Maybe compare how that mission statement or those core values meet your personal values, what you view as being important. And then I'd also have some sort of anecdotal story to illustrate that for your interview panel, because very well they might ask that. So now police departments have to develop a policy manual. And a policy manual tells officers how things are going to be done, what the expectation is. And they usually come in a big, thick book. I'm trying to think. I don't think I have. No, I don't have my old policy manual here. But it's a book. It'll be about that thick, and it will deal with all kinds of different things that occur on a day-to-day basis. And new supervisors and supervisors all the time should be referring to the manual, especially when they have behavior that doesn't meet expectations. So that they've got something in the manual that tells an officer how they're going to behave in that fashion. If you get hired, I would make sure that I know that manual fairly well, because it'll come up at some point in time. And as an officer, it can kind of save your neck. Um, the book is going to talk about two different types of structures. They're going to talk about a tall organization, and that's where you have an organizational chart with a chief and then many layers below the chief until you get to the line level. So you have a chief, maybe deputy chiefs, commanders, captains, perhaps lieutenants, sergeants, and then your line level folks. And that's known as a tall organization. The argument with tall organizations is that there's too much filter between the top and the bottom. So let's say the chief's idea is, we'll say that he's really committed to service, to community service. Well, that may be a different message by the time it gets down to the officers. Officers may have a problem. There may be an issue that they really need the chief to deal with, whether it's a funding issue, whether it's equipment, a training issue, something that's really significant. Not a day-to-day training issue, but a really significant training issue. Well, the chief might never hear of that because as you go through an important thing, again, law enforcement headed bound people, chain of command. Always know who your boss is, and so that you can report, question, ask directly of your boss, and you don't go outside of the chain of command. Death issue. You never want to do that. So this is known as a hierarchical organization. You've also talked about hierarchies in your courts class in 301. If you had it with me, you certainly have. So that's the idea of a tall organization. The next organization is one that became popular with community policing, which is a flat organization. The concept with that is, let's take out some of these middle management people, put the chief closer to the line guys so that their communication is not as broken up. So your basic concept there. The problem with the flat organizations is that you lose some of that straight line of communication. The organization I work for, we went to a fairly flat organization. Kind of interesting. Went to a very flat organization in the community policing era, and that included officers that are removing many lieutenants' positions, promoting captains to commanders. I always wondered about that one. Captains to commanders, now a deputy chief, a chief, and then sergeants with very few lieutenants. And the lieutenants were kind of looking for a job in community policing because the community outreach was done at a macro level by the commanders and at a micro level by the field sergeants and the officers, and the detective sergeants and detectives in specialized investigations kind of things. So how does this work, this flow? Well, sometimes it doesn't work well. Working graveyard patrol, I had 5 separate bosses, depending upon the day of week, time of day, and what my actual activity was by area. Was I in my assigned area, or was I in another area that I had to deal with? If you hear the howling in the background, one of my dogs is sleeping, having a nightmare. Poor thing. But with a flat organization, you do have some of those kind of issues. Most agencies, as much as I don't want to admit it, still go with that quasi-military structure. So make sure that you are aware of that. And it's also a good thing if you're going to study police departments to understand what that means. The next two terms we have are centralized and decentralized. We talked a little bit about that in the discussion board on Peel, and we kind of got off track, I think, a bit in that. A centralized organization or command structure has tight controls throughout the structure. A decentralized organization means that you move pieces into smaller groups. Best way to look at it is, I'm certain every agency from everybody in this class, wherever you live, stresses a decentralized organization, and they do so with, community police offices. They go by a bunch of different names, substations, and it may be, but if you live in Los Angeles, they have a centralized organization, but they're decentralized in that you have, Southwest Division, you have all of the different divisions within LAPD that handle the geographic regions of Los Angeles just because of its size. So you come into some of those, or the issue of decentralization. Now, there's going to be quite a bit of discussion on that in the book. One thing that the book goes over quite a bit, or at least I shouldn't say quite a bit, but at least brings up, is tries to relate the blue wall of silence to the idea of officers protecting other officers to the quasi-military principle. And see, I think that the problem is much less the idea of these quasi-military principles, and it's much more the idea that officers have to make a lot of really tough decisions in a really compressed time frame, and they make mistakes. They don't always make the right choice, and then some officers think, if not, for the grace of God go I, meaning that, I could make the very same mistake and have a very similar or worse result. And how do I deal with, with that? Very difficult thing, and law enforcement's trained for many, many years on bystandership and some of these other issues that come from that, meaning that you do something and something bad happens and you don't intervene. You don't intervene to stop it. We saw that with an incident with an individual by the name of Rodney King in the 90s. And a lot of criticism and eventually, firing and prosecution of officers for their involvement in that particular incident. So that's that stuff really kind of quick. I'd spend a lot of time with it. I don't want to get away from you. You're going to see it again. Make sure that you are aware of the terms that are in bold in the PowerPoint. Divisions and units is the second half of the week, and I'm going to move right through this. Make sure you understand the difference between divisions and units. Just because I think there's an exam question on that you might see. But you have in your organizational chart, you'll have field services or uniform services, investigation, administrative services, and then potentially some other services that are outlined out there that lie outside of those. Lie outside of those three areas. Uniform services are easy: patrol, traffic. Anybody that wears a uniform, SROs, school resource officers. Those would all be in that particular realm. A hybrid can be the school resource officer, which can be housed in either area. And all this is, if you go to your particular agency and query their org chart, organizational chart, it'll show you different the different areas that command staff, higher level officers have responsibility for. So I'm not going to go through those. I probably should, but I think there's a more pressing issue for us to deal with, and that's going to be the subject of this week's discussion board. This week's discussion board is going to talk about the militarization of police. And at this point, today, not as hot of a topic as it was a short while back. During the issues of civil disobedience that we had with the various use of force issues, a couple of years ago, this was a really big problem. And the police using military gear in vehicles to deal with these large-scale problems. See, but I think this last week brings in another whole difficult issue. Think about what your perception of the ideal police officer is. And some of you, and if you, when you're reading the book and you've taken courses in criminal justice, and you've read the newspapers, that's the person that can instantly de-escalate a problem just by their presence, their tone of voice, the words they use, the language they select, and automatically de-escalate a problem. The person may be extremely caring and want to do whatever is possible for as many people as they run into in the course of their day. That is maybe your ideal person who's adept at conflict management. So when a person's rose garden is 3 feet into, or 3 inches into the property line of their next door neighbor, they're able to diffuse that argument. And you're probably laughing at that example, but that got a San Diego police officer killed a few years ago over a dispute just for that reason. Dispute between 2 neighbors on the property line, and the officer was murdered in that situation. So that may be the ideal, but now there's a new issue that has come up, and it can be called all kinds of different things. We saw it in Florida, and that's the concept of the active shooter. You got two issues to think about. The first is the active shooter, and quite honestly, the fact that the operational tempo, for you military people, the operational tempo of an active shooter changes dramatically once that active shooter discovers that there's one more gun in the fight. What that means is that when an active shooter is confronted by an armed person, often the problem stops, and that the active shooter will make a decision to take his life or make some other, or to surrender or give up. And you see that, in several instances. And then you have, so you have that problem that you have in Florida, where there's discussion about officers who didn't run into the problem to sort out, to locate the bad guy and solve the problem. Well, those officers are losing their careers, and they're going to have to live with that the rest of their lives. But it's a heck of a lot easier if you're sitting at the keyboard of a computer and to say, well, that's their job. They should have, they were getting paid to do that. It's an awful lot easier when it's reality and bullets are flying than it is when you're just having to, sit and go, gosh, that's just not right. We'll see how all that comes out. One officer resigned immediately, and that may be that, it could be for the fact that he did as it's being publicized, that he waited. We don't know what the radio traffic is. We don't know what the real-time intelligence was. All we know is that, as people were showing up, he was waiting as opposed to running in there. Columbine, the school resource officer engaged people at the door, the two guys at the door, and this was in the 1990s. Santee, I believe, down here in San Diego County, had a situation where a kid comes, cranks off a couple of rounds, the SRO figures out where he is, confronts him, and the problem's over at that point. But it's going into a deal with a handgun and a semi-automatic weapon, and you don't know the level of skill of the person and exactly what the issue is. And we know now it was a nutty kid who, went in there with murder in his mind. We don't know if it's that or is it a Beslan, North Ossetia issue. For those of you that don't know, Beslan is a city in North Ossetia, which is in the sphere of influence of Russia. And Russia has been involved for several years in a civil war issue with separatists in an area known as Chechnya. Well, the story is that some Chechen rebels put together, a pretty extensive operation where they went into a school over the summertime, acted as workmen, put in a bunch of weapons and explosives and hid them in the recesses of the school. And then on the first day of school, they stole military trucks, military uniforms, and then drove up in front of the school and pretty quickly were able to get a few hundred hostages. Children, parents, teachers, administrators, school administrators. And this went on for 3 days and finally had a very, 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 very bad outcome. So is that the deal? I used to tell my officers when I was patrol sergeant, and talking about different kinds of threats that we might have. What's going to be our approach on a bank robbery with hostages? What's going to be our approach if another agency comes in, does a search warrant, it goes bad, and now we've got officer-involved shooting, people down, and we need to come in and restore order? What's just some general ideas. One of the things we talked about was a school takeover. And I told the people that I work with, if it's a Beslan, you're probably not going home, ever. But the best thing that you can do is distract and disrupt until the cavalry shows up. And if in Beslan, it took them about 45 minutes from the time they seized the facility until they had things under control, meaning the bad guys, where they had everybody contained in a small group, in a gymnasium, in a gym, They'd armed the gym with explosives. There were tripwires coming in and out of the room, and they were in a position to defend it. When patrol's going to get there 3 to 7 minutes after the initial call comes in, and you're going to have to go in and do something. Really easy for me to say, sitting up in front of a room, with 15 people in it, and saying that's what we got to do. And it's a whole lot different when you got to do it. So, this idea of militarization of the police, as you look at it, I'll throw some stuff out in the discussion board and kind of talk about some of those things. But I want you to keep in mind the fact that this is not anywhere as easy as, as it sounds, especially the proverbial Monday morning quarterback. So, all that being said, ton of stuff in here. I'd really go through it with a fine-tooth comb. Make sure that you look at the PowerPoint, carefully, and then our discussion board. I'm going out of town, be operating off of a laptop for a couple of days. So if my communication is sparse, we're going to be probably snowed in where we're going. And so hopefully I'll be able to stay in contact with y'all. In any event, have a good week, and I'll see you guys all in class.